Welcome to the first day of the 2021 Innovation for International Development Expo. I am so glad that you're here with us today. My name is Rhonda Hahn, and I work in Global Engineering Programs and Partnerships. Our department, together with the Shah Family Global Innovation Lab, hosts this expo every year to provide a forum for professionals, students, and faculty to learn from one another. This event usually takes place in person in the AAE building over a day and a couple of evenings. This year, the event is virtual and takes place over 7 days. So let me start by telling you what's in store for you over the 7 days of the expo. Today and tomorrow are student-focused events. Today is the International Development Experience and Learning Panel with Purdue alum and staff. Tomorrow is the Career Opportunities in International Development Panel and Poster Awards. May 3rd through 7th, we will have 3 panels that will cover topics, methods, and trends in global development. On May 3rd, we will have the Seed Grant semifinalists present their final proposals. On May 7th, we will announce the winners of the Seed Grant Awards. Also on May 7th, we will be joined by Dean Mung and Shah Lab benefactor Manu Shah will give us our keynote address, and we're really looking forward to that. If you have not registered for these events, we encourage you to do so. Our staff will put the registration link in the chat. Before we begin today, I'd like to give a couple of personal notes of gratitude. I would like to recognize Pallavi Gupta, who you'll see later on in the panel today. She recently moved from GEPP to Laser Pulse, but she organized the expo so well that it was easy for us to just step in, follow her notes, and see it through. Thank you, Pallavi. We appreciate all your hard work. I would also like to acknowledge the Hall of Music, who is helping us with the production over the run of the expo. Erin Van Eman was our contact, and she helped us get everything organized and calm our nerves. Joe Lehman is backstage running the show. He's taking care of all the technical aspects of Zoom, videos, and slides. Thank you, Erin and Joe. Speaking of slides, if you were here early enough, you got to see a slideshow of the posters that were submitted for tomorrow's awards ceremony. The posters highlight the impressive work that our students and faculty are working on together. I hope you got to see those, and we will be running those again tomorrow as well. So now let me give you a quick rundown for today's agenda. In a few moments, I'm going to turn the show over to our moderator for today's panel. It will wrap up by 1:20, at which time I will come back on to remind everyone of tomorrow's events. If you have any questions for our panel, put those in the chat and we will get to as many as we can as time allows. Our moderators today are Rachel Gehr and Romika, Roshan, Kotian. They are with the Graduate Researchers for International Development Group, GRID for short. On behalf of the GEPP office, we are grateful for all the work that these amazing students do for us. GRID is a student-led group of graduate students who are interested in international development. They come from all across the campus, but are predominantly engineering students. GRID is not limited to graduate students. Undergraduates are welcome as well. We will put a link to their website in the chat below, so please check them out. GRID identified the panelists and speakers that you will hear from today and tomorrow. And so now, without any further ado, I will turn it over to our moderators, Rachel and Ramika. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Rhonda. A warm welcome to all our panelists and attendees. My name is Romika Kotian, and I'm a third-year PhD student in the Innovation and Leadership Studies program. I will be co-moderating this session with Rachel Gehr, who is a third-year PhD student in Environmental Engineering. We are both on the leadership team of the Graduate Researchers for International Development Student Group. Our group, which also goes by the acronym GRID, as Rhonda just mentioned, is dedicated to expanding the international development network among graduate and undergraduate students and providing them with resources to help them succeed in their work. So it is very exciting for us to have the opportunity to engage with an alumni panel who have successfully created careers for themselves in international development. I now invite Rachel to introduce our panel members for today's discussion.
Thank you both, Rhonda and Ramika, for the introduction. So introducing our panelists for today, we have Dr. Ann Gehr, who is a Natural Resources Advisor for USAID, Dr. Jessica Eise, who is a Purdue postdoc in the School of Communication and works in Purdue's Climate Change Research Center, Dr. Michelle Visbal-Onufrak, who works for GE Healthcare as a lead electrical engineer, Dhinesh Radhakrishnan, who works in the Purdue Engineering Education Department as a researcher, and Pallavi Gupta, who is Purdue's Laser Pulse Program Director. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here today. We're excited to talk with you. We just wanted to open by having each of you just give a brief introduction to yourself and maybe some of your experiences. And if you could just answer the question for us as well of what inspired or motivated you to get involved in international development. So maybe Dr. Gehr, if we can start out with you.
Hi all. Yeah, my name is Ann Gehr. I graduated from Purdue ABE in the Environment and Natural Resources track in 2008, and then with my master's and PhD in 2011 and 2014. Joining you here from my home in Washington, DC. Just to give you a little arc of my career path, I guess, and then move on to what inspired me toward it. My career path started with a series of summer internships with the United States Department of Agriculture, specifically their Natural Resources Conservation Service. And there I learned to work with farmers and help them identify their natural resources concerns, and figure out what their challenges were with regard to agricultural development and crop production, things like that. But really the most transformational moment of my life came as a result of my ag and biological engineering capstone project. I was very fortunate to have a faculty advisor who connected me with an opportunity to work with an organization in the Palestinian West Bank on the design of a water distribution system. And our team subsequently had the opportunity to travel to Jordan and visit the region. And really seeing that water stress firsthand was what inspired me on a path to international development. I had worked with farmers in Indiana, which was interesting, but seeing how much more challenging and complicated the resource concerns were in the Middle East region really made me think about pivoting to a place where maybe my skills could be more useful and have a greater impact. So, there were another series of subsequent international experiences made possible through Purdue's Global Engineering Programs and Partnership Office around the Middle East and East Africa, including my own PhD research that was focused in Tunisia, the West Bank, and Qatar. Fast forward to today, though, 5 years after leaving Purdue, I can't believe it's been that long, but 5 years after leaving Purdue, I'm working for a program with the U.S. Agency for International Development that provides research funding for Arab and Israeli scientists to work together on cross-border development challenges. I also work with the U.S. Department of State on advising diplomats in primarily Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Amman, Jordan, on issues related to Middle East region, water management, sanitation, agricultural development, and things like that. But it really was thanks to Purdue for kind of getting me started on that path and making me realize how much more there was that I could give to the world outside of the state of Indiana.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Eise, would you want to go ahead?
Hello, nice to be here. I'm actually joining everybody from San Antonio, Texas, where I'm settling in as I'll be an assistant professor at University of Texas at San Antonio this fall, actually in social and environmental issues in Latin America. So a little bit about who I am, how I got here, and then a little bit about what motivates me. So I started my career in international media production. So I was a practitioner for about 10 years before joining academia. Worked in international media production. I have a master's in journalism and international affairs from New York University. I worked in new media and policy in Washington, DC for some time. And then I worked as the director of communications, the Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue for a number of years before returning to get my PhD. I've worked on international development issues I've worked on international issues since I began my career about, gosh, how many years ago? Maybe, I can't even think how many years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And I was just always very fascinated and curious about why the world works the way it does. Since I was a child, I was like deeply interested in how diplomacy works, what makes all of us special and unique culturally, and how that can strengthen us. But this really strengthened in me in the last, I would say, 7 years when I started to work in food security and climate change. Food security and climate change are just extremely international issues. And so my research in particular focuses on farming and how do we support farmers around the world adapt to climate change and continue to be able to sustain their livelihoods in a dignified way while also producing food so that way we can all eat and have food security in the future. Because with climate change, we're going to see increasing pressure on those things. And I currently work very actively in Colombia with Colombian coffee farmers. And what inspires me and drives me is that climate change is something that we all cause, particularly people in developed countries. But we're all complicit in climate change, and we all need to be a part of the solution. It's not a national issue; it's an international issue, and we need to see each other. We need to see each other as united in this, and that helping each other is helping us, because the more we support our farmers around the world, the more food security we're creating for all of us. Because as climate change increases, we're going to see food scarcity issues in different parts of the world, and we're going to need to rely on each other to trade food when we're experiencing shortages in our own countries. So I suppose I see us as all connected, but I also see us as having a responsibility to take care of each other, especially when we all had a responsibility for causing a problem. But even if we didn't, I think we all have a responsibility for taking care of each other as much as we can. So that's a bit about myself, and I hope I covered everything that you wanted me to cover. If I didn't, let me know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. Dr. Visbal Onufrak, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself. See, I think you're on mute. I'm not sure if you can hear us either.
Maybe we could move on to Dr. Radhakrishnan, if you would like to give us your introduction.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Romika. Thanks, Rachel. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Dhinesh Radhakrishnan. I'm an alumni of the Purdue School of Engineering Education. I graduated with a PhD in 2020, just recently. And my work and focus has been, so my background is in electrical and energy engineering. So I had my bachelor's and master's both in India, and then I came to Purdue to do my PhD in engineering education. I think starting, or the motivation to come to Purdue was also the same reason that I got inspired to enter into international development. So I was working in industry, just to give you a little bit of background, and I get an email from my, at that time, potential advisor saying, hey, I know you've been interested in education, engineering education, because we met a long time ago. And she said, I have a project which is in Kenya. And the idea is that we will be working with children who live on the streets and teach them engineering. It was something so groundbreaking, and I couldn't, it made me very uncomfortable as a person, as an engineer, about how is that possible. So it challenged me, in a cognitive way that I couldn't make sense of it. So that was my first motivation in a way to enter into Purdue and also engineering education and international development. So I wanted to be in the front line to see how that happens because it didn't make any sense to me at that time. And in a way, I'm glad to say now that I think I have some understanding of it. There's still a long way to go of how that could actually happen. So with that as the inspiration, so when I came, and the first project that we received was a seed grant from I2D. That's how my first steps into international development happened. So again, thanks to GPP. And with the initiative there, that started as a small program with the, as you all know, the I2D seed grant is a small potential funding to get it going. We were able to create a model and a program that translated across many contexts right now. So the potential that I was able to see of how a small seed in one place could grow and transfer into other contexts was something that's continuing to inspire and motivate me to be international development. It's also a bit of both personal and professional reasons that also I think I love international development. I enjoy being on the field on the personal level, as I am right now. I am in Kenya on the field, working with the communities, with the people. So that's something that's continuing to keep me going. On a professional level, I'm also motivated and driven by the philosophies of participatory research, participatory work, which means, again, working with the people, with the communities, where both research could translate into action and action could inform research. So seeing those two things happening simultaneously and in a way that we are able to see growth and understand and see those experiences directly is a big motivation for me to be part of the international development. So I think a number of those reasons that allowed me to enter into this place and spend almost 2 years now in Kenya, though I have to come back to the US very soon, but I'm looking forward to continue to come back to these contexts and continue working in international development. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us from Kenya today too. We're happy that you're able to make it. Let's see, Michelle, I think we got your audio working now.
Yes, can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. All right, sorry about that. There was a little blip there on my audio. So hi everyone, I'm very happy to be here. I'm Michelle Visbal. I did a PhD in biomedical engineering at Purdue with Dr. Young Kim at his lab over there, and I graduated in spring 2019. Actually, since then, that very same year, I joined GE Healthcare as a lead electrical engineer. I've worked in a couple of roles supporting, so as GE is known to be a global company, but in particularly focusing on designing medical devices. And kind of it's interesting how the experience of my PhD and how it has contributed. So I'll probably step back and give a little bit more background about that. I think one of the important things I want to emphasize, so this background you see is from back home in Puerto Rico. I am from Puerto Rico, and not from this same town though, but I am from there, and I thought it was really nice. It's called Cueva Ventana, Window Cave. And I think one of the interesting things, so with my project, stepping back, with my project and my PhD, I spent a summer in Kenya. Actually there I met Dhinesh and I believe Pallavi as well. There I was working on developing a smartphone app to measure hemoglobin, to check if you have, you could be anemic, using a smartphone, essentially looking through your eyelid. And so this is again for in areas where you don't have limited access to healthcare, for screening, for stratification of risk, right? And assessing, do you have to get medical care right away? And so what does this have to do with Puerto Rico? And I think, unfortunately, Puerto Rico became, big in the news when we had the Hurricane Maria strike in 2017. And I think one of the challenges there was also just how, in particular, although my PhD, I had this wonderful opportunity to spend the summer in Kenya and work on this this project, it became very personal for me, in that seeing, this is something that back home, just little things, just the effort, the thought process of identifying needs, or essentially things projects that could be sustainable, that you can address an issue that's very present and very obvious for you. So I think just small things like that as I was preparing, the hurricane was on 2017. I was in Indiana, of course, but have family back home still. And just undergoing that process and seeing all the limitations as the hurricane passed by and the recovery. And then I was getting ready to go to Kenya the next summer. I think there was a lot that I learned from just seeing back home the experience and understanding. Not only do I see the relevance of, from the scientific aspect, right? The being able to address having this cool, portable app to measure hemoglobin and all the different ways that we can expand on that, but also just seeing that, well, it's something that I wasn't expectedly able to connect on that level and just bring it. So I would say, just kind of a segue into how the international, or my interest in international development or international project, I think it's always been there, just because of the nature of where I come from and kind of the political or cultural relationship of Puerto Rico with the rest of the world. I think since I was little, was involved in different other Girl Scouts and things like that, that I was able to do some other international travel. And I think just in general, that opens your perspective to how similar we can all be instead of our differences, and how we can bring our strengths, our knowledge, right, our technical and non-technical skills to hopefully contribute a little bit to make the world a better place. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll finish our introductions with Pallavi.
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here on the platform. I think my journey to international development is a bit different. I grew up in India, in one of the most populous and second poorest state in the country. So I have seen challenges growing up, and trust me, I did not want to. I wanted to run away from there and not work necessarily or be troubled by those issues again. So I set out to be a software engineer. I worked as a programmer for about 6-7 years, and then I moved to London. I did my management degree from there. I worked with PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers as a consultant on government projects. And then one of the pieces I had written about, how innovation and technology can actually, via policy, have some impact in international development sector. That sort of got picked up back home. And just by draw of luck, I got a chance to work with the government, the state government in India, and start this initiative, which was mostly about, how do we create platforms via policy, where the different sectors of the society, third sector, the international development, NGO, social sector, the corporates and the governments can come together and sort of combine the innovation, the resources, the strengths and skills of all these sectors to then create solutions that can be long lasting, can have impact on the policy, and can have large scale impact in the state and the country. That was an experience. I think that was a flip in mind. And doing that work was kind of also the first time I realized that there was a sense of achievement, there was a sense of being useful, there was a sense of purpose that was in that kind of work that I hadn't felt either as an engineer or as a consultant. And that was a new feeling for me. So I decided to continue that, just because I felt that I was deriving on a personal level more satisfaction from the work, and I loved it. And so I came to US to actually do another master's, mostly to write about this collaborative and learn and write about this collaborative methodology. And I have been in this field since then. So for all of you out there who haven't yet decided whether you want to definitely go in an international development sector, you don't have to make that choice. Like, we can jump around. And from personal experience, I can speak, this one thing is that there are so many different skill sets that are required to do this kind of work. The more around the block you have been, the more useful you become. So feel free to jump around, feel free to do all sorts of work that you want to and like to, and find your space in international development. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much, Pallavi. And yeah, it's good to know for students, I think, that moving around does help, because a lot of people think international development is one specific thing and they want to go after getting a certain skill set, but then it's a whole lot of things that come together and allow you to be a part of this community, I suppose. So I'll come back with another question for all of y'all. What are some of the most important lessons that you have learned while working on international development projects? How about we start with Dr. Eise?
I'm sorry, my connection cut out for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. I just said, what are some of the most important lessons you have learned while working in international development?
That is such a good question, and I hardly know where to start. I feel like every year I'm learning new lessons. I guess that probably the biggest lesson I would say that I would encourage everybody to keep in mind is that when you really care about your work and you're working in international issues that are really difficult, which all issues, international development issues are difficult, anticipate that your emotions are going to get involved in what you do. And also understand that sometimes you're going to be disappointed or you're going to be frustrated, and that it's actually important to understand when you need to check yourself because you've become too emotional about something. That's something a big lesson. Another lesson is that I cannot credit this because this is something that Michelle Obama said, but change takes generations. Okay, so if you enter into development work or any sort of work towards social justice issues of any kind, if you go in expecting to resolve an issue in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to be disappointed, and sometimes you might even do more harm than good. Right? So change is a process that takes lifetimes, and that doesn't change the fact that change is desperately urgent, but it's also a reality that I think we all need to face, is that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I guess a third, I've given you a lot of lessons that I've learned. A third is that it's really, really important to listen to other people and to listen to what they have to say. It is really important to go into a new environment not assuming that you know what's going on, and not assuming that your type of education or your brand of knowledge, so to speak, has any kind of superiority over another person's type of knowledge or brand of knowledge. You know, many of us in this room have what we would call like formal education, so a PhD or getting a PhD. But the people that you work with in international development have all different kinds of knowledge and education, a lot of which might be knowledge that they gained through their hands-on experience of farming for their entire life, along with the wisdom and knowledge they inherited from their mother and father and their grandmother and grandfather and generations. And you can't presume because you've sat in a classroom that you have any kind of understanding of what that is, because you don't. And so it takes a long time to understand the complexity of the issue, and it requires respect and a lot of introspection to to understand that everybody has a knowledge system that they're bringing to the table, and everybody has a set of beliefs that they're bringing to the table. And everybody is going to be emotional about them because we're human beings and emotions are always involved, always. And so if you think that there's this scholar who says, if you think you're a brain on a stick, you're wrong. You are not a brain on a stick. You are a human with a brain and with a body with beliefs and feelings. So you actually are more controlled by your feelings, and you can be more irrational when you pretend like they don't exist. So that's why I really bring this up, because I've seen this happen before. So those are a few of my lessons. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Gehr, would you like to comment?
Sure, I would just echo Jessica's point about managing emotions, especially working for government. You have to separate your personal opinions from what the mission is, and you might be asked to do something or communicate a message that you don't personally agree with, and need to really kind of just swallow what you think is right and where your opinions are in order to do the job that you're asked to do. And that really isn't easy sometimes. And it's something to think about if you're considering an international development career with the government or a government job in general. And then I guess I'm also echoing another point that Jessica made about the value of cultural competence and cross-cultural communication. I learned a lot about other cultures just on campus and through a variety of international experiences before I even left Purdue. Thinking about the opportunities that I had to help host international visitors or get to know international students, to travel with faculty and attend international conferences, or conducting my own research fieldwork in various countries. All of those things combined to help me better identify and communicate with those that have, different backgrounds, come from different cultural contexts. And every day now I'm working with individuals from across the Middle East, from Israel, from Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco. I mean, even just this morning before I got on the call with you, I've talked with people who come from totally different backgrounds, from the private sector, from government, from the military, and they all have their own completely different cultures and communication styles. Even if we all grew up in the Midwest, if I'm working, in government, a colleague is coming from the private sector, someone else is coming from a military background, we all think about things and approach issues completely differently. And so I've had to learn how to, through experience, just how to interpret actions and reactions. And I think that helps make me a more effective employee. So.
Thank you so much. Pallavi, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, yes to everything that was said by other panelists. I think I can't echo the importance, enough the importance of just listening and accounting for other people's experience. But beyond that, I think one of the early learning that I had, which has still stuck with me is, I was coming at this work, having been an engineer for almost like 7, 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years. And then a consultant with, PwC, working with UK government on policy issues and all. So I came to this sector thinking that I know a lot, and that innovation and technology was important to solving these challenges. And I quickly realized that, engineering, technology, innovation is actually the smallest piece of the whole impact story. And it's so easy to create a fantastic, very sparkling, beautiful technology or solution, which would then could fail. And it could fail because people may not find it, relevant, may not find it important to adopt. And if they don't adopt it, no matter how brilliant your solution is, it's not going to work. So in some sense, the lesson here was that the client here is the people, is the community, and they hold the center stage. They are the key, the primary stakeholder in your stakeholder analysis. And they have to be in the driving seat, because unless they accept what you're saying, what you're proposing, and they have skin in the game, and they feel there is ownership, you and the solution can as easily fail, right? So that's one big thing. The other thing I also realized, again, a stark reality, you know, sometimes we are so married to technology, we're so married to our own idea of solution, that we don't pay as much importance to the process. I am now actually kind of a firm believer that process is more important than product. If we have process figured out, like how do we arrive to a solution, if that part is clear, I am fairly confident we will arrive to a implementable, applicable, relevant solution. Now, that solution may not necessarily be the one that was initially imagined, but it would be something that would have higher chances of working than otherwise. So process to me is really more critical than the solution. And the third thing is, for me, is also, it's a bit hard to grasp. It was a bit hard to grasp for me initially, because, you know, when we talk about international development and we look at SDG goals and we look at sort of policy, everything is very cleanly divided into buckets. It's either education, it's either environment, it's either, you know, nutrition. But Dhinesh can talk about it. I mean, nutrition, education, you know, environment, this is all connected. You know, you cannot not have proper nutrition and be good at, you know, education, or you know, you have to account for everything. So just a plug here that whenever we are talking about problems, it is really very important to think about where does this problem intersect with other problems. There's no clean problem. There's no clean bucket. So where does it intersect with other problem, and what are the different parameters that in the process that you know, you or whoever is working on need to also question and ask and account for. If that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Pallavi. Pallavi just mentioned Dr. Radhakrishnan in her conversation. Would you like to carry forward?
Absolutely, thanks. And yeah, I'll pick up from where Pallavi said, and I echo everyone's excellent points. And yeah, the interconnection, no way. So energy issue in a specific location doesn't mean it only needs expertise in energy fellows or folks to come in and solve their problems. It requires someone to, a group, a team that builds off of educational energy. And for example, let me use the location where we are at, the AMPATH program, which is created to address healthcare issues initially, realized later on that healthcare cannot be dealt with unless we figure out educational, environmental, economical, and other kinds of challenges that are related in the contexts, particularly in rural communities. Unless someone is economically empowered, they're not going to access healthcare. So we need to think about economic access, which is going to require education. So we are thinking about education as a part of it too. And that comes with environmental related challenges that has to be addressed in the communities. So it's all interconnected. And I think that's an important takeaway, which also means as an international development engineer, researcher, whatever your position is going to be able to work in a context with multiple expertise and to be able to relate to that interdisciplinary nature of the work itself better. Additionally, I will add maybe a couple of points to the list. So one, as students, one of the things from a career perspective, when it comes to international development, there is this, so I'm also talking from a research perspective, where I was able to do a short stint with MIT D-Lab, where I was evaluating D-Lab students' experiences, more than 1,000 students' experiences as they participated in international development. One of the biggest challenges everybody talked about, and this is true, is that they were all so convinced that this is the best way that they developed as an engineer. By participating in international development experiences, but they were extremely disappointed when they found out there are not enough jobs for everyone. in international development. So you have to understand how to navigate and think about career from that perspective. And this was one of the challenges that I was thinking as I was growing and I wanted to be in international development. I was constantly looking for one organization where I could be a fit. But now I realize, because I have 4 different titles with almost 4 different organizations right now. So it doesn't have to be one place where you fit as an international development, person. So you have to think about what makes sense to you. So you design your expertise and use that expertise to grab opportunities from multiple places and be an international development, practitioner, researcher, whatever that position is. One of the other things I would emphasize on, which is talked about a little bit, is we need to learn to be uncomfortable. When you're an international development person, it becomes the new inertia. So being uncomfortable is going to be your daily life, where it might be with the conversation you will have to have with the communities. It might be the conversations you want to have with your donors, your partners, and the kinds of relationships that you want to navigate, to whom there's a lot of ethically conflicting scenarios that you will have to do. So you really need to learn and accept and embrace uncomfortness in a way, and then to survive in that situation. So learning to do that takes time. It takes a while. And one of the other important lessons based on the communities that I've been working with, which might be very much same, is you need to also, one of the things is learn to be an advocate. Like you need to learn the skill to be in practice advocacy, because of the places that you work with requires that. And the kind of beliefs that you have as a person, and that mapping on that to the communities and the places that you work with, when you're able to advocate and create that relationship with those communities, there's automatically the trust, the empathy, and other things that grows, which is very, very key to those kinds of partnerships and international development. So it's a mix of all those things. And I think, international development, one thing itself, it's not an easy space. It will, as Pallavi said, I would say that again, which is be around and continue to stick around and do multiple things and see how you can design yourself, but don't look for a place that where you could be a fit, but you find those places where, that fits your expertise and background.
So not only do we have to interact with a lot of different stakeholders who have different positions, but we also need to don different hats ourselves. That's thank you for that takeaway. Dr. Visbal, would you like to comment?
Sure, and I think that's great. Thank you, because I do want to echo Dinesh's words and kind of show how it relates to, I guess, my particular position too with NG healthcare. And I would say, well, I have like 2 main lessons, I guess, that I learned through my experience. I was also as part of a researcher with the AMPATH program. And although it was only 3 months, and in comparing to like other scholars, researchers, medical students who were there, let's say years or more, like Dinesh, you have been there a lot longer, and kind of part of me envies you really, because I looking forward to a time when I can go back to Kenya to visit. But anyways, so the first one is, I want to summarize, it's just being willing to step out of your comfort zone in many ways. Not only are you, if you have the opportunity to travel abroad and stay somewhere, and then just really stepping out of that comfort zone, and also in what you think or that you've learned from that culture. I feel like before going there, I was very worried about the language and tried to catch up a few words of Swahili before I got there. But also, as you get there in the first few weeks, definitely I was glad that I allowed myself just the time to really connect with the people, and also not make it. And I think that's another one of the strengths of this program in particular, that this is not, we develop a project and we dump it there and that's that, right? Some of the issues that we see, right, in international development there, and just really addressing, understanding, and if we take it back into the perspective of business, which is where I'm at now. You look at it from their customer needs, right? What's your user population? What is the problem that you're really trying to address? And are you making them part of the solution? I think that's really important to make sure that they are valued. And again, make it part of that solution that you're developing on, and empower them rather than just, again, bring something, come up with your assumptions and again, assume that you're right, assume that you have you have fixed that problem for them or whatever. And so I think that I said I was just going to summarize it, but I kept talking. But again, it's just being able to, or allowing yourself to get out of your comfort zone. And then second, I think this ties more directly. It's more of I guess, a personal lesson. One of the things that I mentioned, I was just there 3 months. And I think at first I struggled, probably the first month it is a little bit isolating, right? You've stepped out of your comfort zone. Like I said, you're meeting new people. Everybody's also on this role that you're trying to get your project started. There's different challenges along the way and all that. But just one of the things so one of the founders of the program, or I should say, so Dr. Joe Mamlin, his wife, Sarah Ellen Mamlin, who was in Kenya as well. I think I asked her, so how do you, because they were there all the time, but they would, all these researchers would come and go. I was like, oh, how do you get by, how do you get used to this, like people coming in and going? And she said, well, once I read a book called Celebrate the Temporary, and it's basically a poem, kind of a poem book. And I had to look it up and understand. And so essentially her point was, oftentimes you have, let's say you're traveling somewhere and you have a very insightful conversation with someone who's sitting next to you, and maybe you never see that person again. But it's just so, in applying that, I saw that very relevant, and me making sure I made the best out of my experience, no matter if it was just 2 more months and that was it. I wasn't going to be able to go back to Kenya, but it gave me a lot more than just the experience, right? It's just something that I'm able to apply to my daily life whenever I feel like, you're worried too much about the future, what's going to happen. I know all of us, as we were students, and I presume many of us are grads, many are grad students in the audience. So I think that's a lesson that I like to share, that I learned and I value a lot. So it's something that I apply, just as now I mentioned, with GE Healthcare, I work with global teams. So I work with a team in India and as well as in France. And so you still are all the time stepping out of that comfort zone and learning what works. Not only just in terms of the technology you were talking about, well, communication, is it a good approach to write an email or this way, or just give them a call? So it's just something that I have present, that experience of being in Kenya 3 months, and just the preparation and all that helped a lot with how I'm thankfully able to have I feel like successful career where I'm at.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your responses. Yeah, I can relate. People always ask what the most difficult part of my project is, and they always ask, do you encounter a lot of engineering challenges? And engineering is by far the easiest part of what we do. It's everything else, the communication and the collaboration and the cultural competency, that becomes the most difficult part for sure. So kind of going off of that, we have a question from the chat, and just a reminder too, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in there and we will get to as many as we can. But this is from Danielle Wagner, who is part of the GRID leadership team. And she's saying that several of the panelists have mentioned ways to work with people's cultural strengths. So can you talk more about any specific experiences, whether they be in the workplace or locally on campus or abroad, but experiences that stand out where you can leverage your own strengths as well as the strengths of a community or teammates or partnerships that you're working with? And I'll open that up to anyone on the panel that wants to give their insight on that.
I'm happy to share an example. Although I'm sure everyone
thank you.
Examples, yeah. So I think I should have also been specific about not only people's cultural strengths, but also their individual strengths. So when I have a team that I work with in Colombia, and it's a small team with limited resources, but we've created several climate change outreach campaigns and resources. And we've had a degree of success with them. And when I talk about I'll try to use an example, and I'll try to give you really tangible points, because I know that can be really helpful. So like working with cultural strengths, Colombians use WhatsApp, the messaging system, WhatsApp. And, people from the United States don't use it. And so I learned to adapt my communication to that environment. And the strength in using WhatsApp is you actually can get really immediate responses from people. Right. So there's a strength in being able to use that, and you can build personal connections very quickly when you have somebody's cell phone number, and you can have that type of more informal connection with them rapidly. So that's that can really help when you're trying to build personal connections. But when it comes to my team, for instance, I think you asked about how you can use your own strength. I think one of my strengths on a team is trying to keep everybody trying to see every person as a human being, and keep us focused on a goal and working towards a goal. But on my team, I have people who are really good at networking and outreach. So I have one Colombian woman on my team who works with us who's really good at networking and outreach. And so she coordinates the majority of our interviews and our visits to farmers because she's extraordinarily gifted in that way, right? So if I didn't have this person on my team, we wouldn't have had the data collections that we had, and we wouldn't have had the impact we had, because she has a really strong local network ties. So if you're doing international work and you need to outreach with communities, you need a person on your team who has that ability, those networks, that capacity to connect you with people really rapidly and quickly. We jokingly call her the godfather of our team, right? Because she knows everybody, right? She knows everybody. She's able to, and if you don't have that person, it's very difficult. But then you also need somebody who has really keen administrative abilities on your team. And in different cultural contexts, there's different skills are valued differently, but you do need to find somebody who's very good at administrative details. You need to, because you can't do all the administrative details yourself. And so finding somebody on your team who within that cultural context can handle your administrative details, you need that, and you need to capitalize it. And if you have somebody in the wrong spot doing the wrong job, they're going to disappoint you and frustrate you. And so understanding who the people are that you're working with and trying to channel their talents into particular areas is really critical. So this person who does, all this networking for us, detailed transcription processes or detailed analyses is not her forte. And so if you try to put a person in the wrong bucket or the wrong spot for them, I don't like the word bucket because that makes it feel very constraining, but if you don't put them on the position where they can shine the brightest, right? And that, so I guess there's individual, but it's also cultural too. And so one other example is with coffee farmers that we work with. They have really vibrant in-person networks. So talk about social networks, they're really vibrant in person. So a lot of information spreads by word of mouth. And that's great. That's a great strength. And so working with that community and the culture of that community, if we can find those dissemination points, if we can find those hubs where we can drop the information and then it can spread via word of mouth, we're really working with people and what they can offer while trying to offer what we can offer too. So I hope that was concise enough. And I did try to give you specific examples because I do think sometimes those can help root us in kind of an understanding of what that means. So yeah, I suppose, and then you said my own strength. So hard and embarrassing to talk about your own strengths, but I think maybe just trying to be observant and see people. But that can take a long time because I've observed we often misattribute why people are doing things. We often think it has a lot more to do with us than it really does. So when people do things, it very rarely has anything to do with you. So one thing I've really noticed that people do a lot, and I would advise all of you to avoid this hang up, is if somebody behaves a certain way, they make you feel awkward or they do something awkward and you think, oh, what did I do to make them awkward? It probably didn't have anything to do with you. So like, you need to let it go. You really need to not make every interaction be about you. That's really important. That will help you go a lot further in seeing what people's like actual motivations and strengths are, so you can work with them better.
Thank you so much for your answer. That was really helpful. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to contribute?
I can share a very quick example, and this is a context that Danielle is well familiar with, so I'll use that. And what I mean by culture here is going to be different from most of our understanding. So, for example, the program that we work with on the ground in Kenya, we work with street kids or street children, and they learn our engineering program to design innovations and solve problems in the community. One of the cultural strengths for that group, where if I define street youth as a community and they have their own culture, is to be vocal, is to be, resilient because of their experiences, and they clearly know what they want. And one of the ways that we were able to leverage that strength was easily by making giving them the ownership to be the designers of the environment and the program for themselves, because they are very active, and that's one of their strengths in taking part and being vocal when they know that something is not right or they don't like. They won't hesitate a second to tell you that I don't like this, just change, or I'm not enjoying it. Which is totally opposite with the teachers in the community, because they're very shy and they're always scared about telling these things to you. So when you're designing a program and working with the community, the strength of being vocal itself made it easy for us to implement, an approach like participatory. And the same thing in a context where we are doing a similar program in Zimbabwe. One of the things that we were able to do, we're doing this with 160 high school girls. And we were able to, one of the steps that we took initially because of our experiences in Kenya was to identify their strengths ahead of time, even before starting the program. So we did something called an assets and prior knowledge assessment with them. And one of the simple things we were asking them to do, because they are learning engineering, we asked them to draw an engineer. And they were just drawing an engineer. This came as a huge surprise for us, because research that is done in the US says female engineers tend to draw male as engineers. When they are thinking about an engineer, the immediate picture is a man who's in a hat or wearing a safety hat, or a number of those very common stereotypes of who looks like an engineer. The girls in Zimbabwe, more than 60% of them drew a female as an engineer. So the self-belief and the idea, which is totally contradictory to the research we have seen in the US, which is less than 20% recognize female as engineers in the first go. So it's interesting so understanding that self-belief and knowledge about seeing themselves to be engineers is an important strength in the cultural context where they are. So we are able to easily translate that in teaching engineering now to them, because they can see themselves in the place of an engineer and take up that role in a more active and engaged way. So some of those tools that could be designed, there is a whole set of tools that's designed for asset-based community development, which you can look at to even identify initially about strengths of communities and how to leverage, which is a shift from the deficit perspective. So we're not looking at what problems or what is lacking in a community.
That's a really interesting point. I'd never thought about how realizing that you can be that engineer and that self-importance is really valuable. Do any of the other panelists have a comment? We'll maybe take one more panelist and then move on to the next question, unless no one has anything. Okay, Romika, do you want to go ahead then with the next question?
Yeah, we have one more question from the audience. This is from Edwin, and I'll just read whatever he's posted on the chat. Cultural competency has been highlighted, which I think is an absolutely essential skill to have. In the spirit of having uncomfortable conversations, how have you navigated situations in which a cultural difference or practice is clearly and demonstrably the hindrance to a project success? So this is for anyone on the panel. Please feel free to unmute and answer.
I can share one, but I feel like I've talked a lot. So if there's somebody else who'd like to share one first, go ahead.
I can go ahead.
Okay,
All
go
right.
ahead, Nisha.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do have, I guess, a very specific example in mind. So what I went to do in Kenya was a clinical study to essentially, right, I mentioned doing an app to measure hemoglobin non-invasively through the inner eyelid for this part. So, and I think one of the main challenges was, first off, I guess, understanding, well, I mean, we're collaborating with the Eldoret Moy Teaching and Referral Hospital. And I think right off the bat, I think the you know, kind of, it was a little bit of, I guess, of lack of timing, I guess, on our part to unfortunately not being able to arrive sooner and really get familiar. But also in there, that's where we discovered just being able just to set up, although we had coordinated all virtually, right, and before my arrival to Kenya, the groups of patients, which clinicians I was going to be able to tie in and essentially get patients that were being referred for blood tests to participate in our imaging study. There was a lot of, unfortunately, red tape, right? So I had to, even with IRBs and all that approved, right? All the IREC, I think it's called in Kenya, all the permissions, right? All the paperwork needed to start the study. I think it was more of, I guess, a lack of understanding and then just knowing, like, who are these people? Where are they coming from? I have never seen their faces. So I think it's one of those things where and I'd say, I wouldn't really want to call it a cultural hindrance. It's more so cultural differences in general, where we may think here, well, in the US, that to us, it's probably very natural to send an email and to quickly, like we are doing right here and now, we're connecting. I haven't seen, most of you, I've never met in person, but it's just that connection. I think it resonates a little bit with what I believe Jessica was saying about being able to, this word of mouth, or just having more of that personal connection that we oftentimes have gotten so used to just doing it virtually. So in Kenya, I found that particularly I really needed to take my time to connect with not only maybe the research assistant that was going to be working with me and doing the consent for the different individuals that were volunteering, the patients from the clinic, but also just, again, understanding any of the stigmas around. So for instance, and I guess just to make it very specific as to why. So mainly and Dhinesh touched a little bit on this, but the AMPATH consortium was originally started as a way to mitigate the HIV/AIDS pandemic back in the 90s. So around that time frame, so don't quote me, but around that time frame. And so again, looking for enabling, healthcare, mainly to address that issue. So a lot of that stigma is also carried around about whether, HIV patients and tagging along to that, then that their status be known and all that stuff that I think, we in our culture, I'm saying we in our culture in general, United States, have come to a more, acceptable, it's much more acceptable, that regardless of your health condition, you're worthy of as a person and with your healthcare and what, what you deserve, right? So I think it was just in general, was that just that lack of connection and in-person connection definitely would have made things move much slower in terms of actually being able to get the patients into the the clinic where we had our imaging setup and all that, and just seeing what was it about. So I think in particular one of the things I was that I was able to, and I still use it every now and then if I want to talk about my project. Since I had to give instructions to the patient on how to sit in front of the device and place their face and all that stuff, I made a video of just essentially showing the process, the setup, and talking. And we also made sure to translate into Swahili, although there are different tribes in Kenya in different languages. Swahili is one of their official languages in addition to English. And so I think it was a good oversight, a good oversight that we had, that was just essentially being able to prepare that video in advance and be able to disseminate that information and build that confidence of what we were trying to do. And they were also being able to feel that it was something safe, that it wasn't something invading their privacy in any way. And again, just being able to build that confidence in that clinical study.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Eise, if you would like to tell us about your experiences as well.
I'll jump in. So all of us are, so, everybody took history classes in school, and many of us probably thought, history is so boring, okay? But actually, history explains why we are the way we are and who we are in many ways. I'm not even a historian, and I'm over here like touting the importance of history. But so in Colombia, where I work, many of you may be aware that there's a long history of civil war in Colombia, which is relatively recent, as early as the 90s, and further in many, and there's still a lot of conflict. And civil war is really a terrible thing for a country. Even in the United States of America, if you know history, you know that the Civil War in the United States, which is ancient history, right? It's still like there's still strange legacies from that Civil War, right? That is like a part of our culture. And in Colombia, the Civil War, it does terrible things to people because it really turns, in a way, it can turn neighbor against neighbor, brother against sister, one town against another town. It's really terrible. And what that does is it erodes trust, right? It erodes trust, and it makes you feel that you're unsafe and that you need to be careful about what you say, and that you helping people out might backfire, right? So helping people out might backfire. So any country you work in that has, it's all different, right? Every civil war is different. Every conflict is different. But when you work in an environment that has this legacy, the people you work with, especially if they're of the age where they lived that and experienced that, so older, middle-aged coffee farmers, they're heavily shaped by having lived through decades of terrible conflict, right? And this can mean that things that we need for, combating social problems like trust and willingness to share and willingness to help and willingness to participate might not be something that people want to get involved with because of this legacy of trauma that they have. And so that's a cultural context, which is very understandable, but it can, in the terms of this question a person asked, like be a hindrance. It can prevent progress. And it's unfortunate, but also very understandable. So in the context in which we're working, we do encounter that, where we want people to participate in a project. We want farmers to share their adaptation ideas to climate change. We want them to, share these things with each other, but they're not willing to do so because the trust maybe isn't there. Not in all cases, but in some cases. And if you go to a country where there isn't that kind of legacy of broken trust and trauma, you have a very different experience when you ask people to participate in these activities. And so it can be difficult, and it's certainly not their fault, and it's not our fault, but it is the way it is. It's somebody's fault. Let's be clear. It's somebody's fault, right? But it's definitely not the little guy, right? It's not the little guy's fault. Yeah, so I see somebody has their hand up. I'll go ahead and stop.
I think Pallavi has also requested to answer this question. Thank you so much, Dr. Eise. That's a very deep setting answer that we don't usually think of because it's not something you see at the surface. So I want to thank you, and then I'll move on to.
You're welcome. Yeah, if I can just I'll just say one last thing. Before you go into a context, maybe consider reading a history book on where you're going. It might take you a couple days, and you might think, history is not my thing. History is boring. It's really important to understand the history of a place you're going. So, there's a lot of really great historians who write in an engaging way. So I'd say pick up a history book if you can before you go somewhere.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Romika, I'll let Anne go first, and then I'll just take very little time to touch upon one small point that I'm hoping to make. Go ahead.
All right.
All right, thanks, Pallavi. Also, I don't want to take long because I know there are a lot of other important questions that we want to get through on this panel and not much time left. But one really brief example of how cultural beliefs might be able to might get in the way of implementing a solution. And it might also touch on Taek's question about human factors too. You know, I work in a space where we're talking about water management in very arid, dry regions of the world. And one solution to managing that is reusing wastewater, you know, treating and reusing wastewater, especially for agricultural production, for irrigation of crops. However, there are certainly going to be some psychological hangups about using this kind of dirty like water and that ick factor associated with that, as well as, you know, deeply held like religious beliefs, particularly in Islam, related to clean and dirty and what's appropriate to, you know, put onto your food or even handle. And so as engineers trying to promote what might seem like a logical, sustainable sort of solution to a problem that is limited water resources, we have to work with, you know, communities and also engage non-traditional, what we might consider non-traditional stakeholders. And in this case, the country of Jordan has a really great kind of sort of case study of working with the Ministry of Islamic Affairs to essentially issue a fatwa of like, no, this is fine. Like, you can use this water for irrigation of crops. Like, it has been transformed through physical and chemical engineering processes to be able to use this water. I mean, that doesn't fix everything, you know, that doesn't immediately change people's perceptions. But that sort of, you know, cross-disciplinary sort of engagement can help overcome what might be initially seen as a hindrance to solving your problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you made the one point that I wanted to make. Strategically, do your stakeholder analysis and find an ambassador before going into the project. And if you're lucky, find a couple of influencers within the community and speak to them regularly. Vet your idea, vet the project with them before you take it out to the community, and also then co-create and stuff that was mentioned earlier. But I do want to mention another sort of question back to the audience, and Edwin, on your question, is that when we say project success, right, what success lens are you using here? Is it possible that the project success as what you and the team is thinking of isn't really aligning with the success definition of the community? So I would first check that. And secondly, the other thing, which is more at an individual level and personal experience that I've had, is sometimes it's also conflicting with your personal value system. So I've been in field on multiple occasions where, say, I'm doing a community drive in rural India, and we have like 50 people come in. All men have taken up chairs that we had set out, and women are by default sitting on the floor. And this is their role they have internalized. In those situations, I had to do a personal check to see, well, this is completely against what I personally believe in. It's completely against my value system. Do I drop everything and fight that battle, or do I, in some ways, pick my battle and put the success of this issue and deal with that, the other nuance in a bit different manner, differently? So you have to do those two calculations all the time. Whose success are we talking about? And also, you know, what battle to pick and why.
Those are some very important points. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. I think we just have a few minutes left here before we're gonna close up the panel. So one last question we just wanted to ask was if each of our panelists can just share one piece of advice that they would give to the students on the call that are interested in international development. What experiences would you recommend we have before we finish our time at Purdue, or how should we spend the next couple of years, or even just next few months before we go off and try to engage in these international development projects? So let's go ahead and start with maybe Dhinesh. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. One thing that's really hard to narrow down or pinpoint, but I would say probably where we started because of the audience being most of the students here. So I think what Pallavi said before, and I echo again, trying to understand how we are and to be able to stick around in international development. So patience and persistence is going to be super important. Both are my keywords right now. So it, in a way, because one, you will see failures too often. And what I mean by failures is challenges. What you expected to happen and it doesn't happen the same way. You made a plan, it didn't go that way. So those kinds of failures will continue to happen because of how complex the system is, the structural barriers, political, cultural, number of other factors. So it's important to continue to understand and embrace those situations and to persist throughout the process. And as I said again, I think one of the important things, and I think GEPP does that immensely well, is to help you with creating the network. So I would like, one of the things is to leverage resources that's there immediately to build the network as wide as possible for you, because you will, I mean, to continue to keep those conversations is how opportunities will turn up. And one of the things I've understood from international development is to maintain those connections. It's not just to find those connections, but to maintain those partnerships and connections that will lead you to opportunities you might not know. It just suddenly, I get an email suddenly from someone saying, hey, we met 2 years before, we talked about this, would you be interested? And there you go, it's there. So a new project, new position, an entirely new perspective of what you do. So I think that's probably the lesson or the takeaway that I will share, which is to continue to stick around and be patient and persistent with your efforts.
Thank you so much. Michelle?
Sure, I can go ahead. And I think there's already been a lot of lessons shared throughout, the different conversations. And I think I too have learned from, what others, my other colleagues and people embedded as panelists here have shared too. So that has been a great opportunity for me as well. I do admit it. I think it's just one of the things that makes you think about what you can share, but also what others have shared already. So probably what I guess share as a takeaway is, particularly, I liked when, I think it was Dr. Eise, sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong.
It's Eise. It's Eise. Yeah, but it's okay. Everybody mispronounces it. Don't worry.
Okay. So about reading a book and understanding the history of where you're going. And I think that, we can apply that in general to, if you're passionate about a particular, area or where you're at right now, saying for me, it's medical devices. And so understanding, what is it that's out there? Just really take the time to learn, see what's out there, already by, participating in this panel, you're taking the time and learning, I guess, directly through our experiences. But going out there to see what's out in books, other conferences, courses you could probably do. I think that's definitely going to help you as well, to prepare, right? You may be fortunate to have an experience in traveling abroad, or perhaps you won't, not as kind of what Dhinesh was saying, not as you probably pictured it. But I think, and for me, probably, 2 years back, 3 years back, I didn't know I was going to be at GE Healthcare, and particularly actually also working with global teams. So I do apply this constantly of just being aware of, of the cultural context. It applies very directly to the products that we make. We don't just do products for the US, we do it for all over the world. And very different use cases and clinical scenarios happen, and things that, the users are the misuse. And you have to keep those in mind in our context. So again, it's just, take the time to go beyond probably the technical of your field and your interests. And that will probably, I think just keep your mind open to what can be. I think we're all in evolution. I'm here now, who knows 2 years from now as well. And I think as you keep your mind open, you'll see what works best for you and when you can best contribute, where you can best shine. So thanks again.
Thank you. That's a great point, especially in grad school. We get so stuck on one thing that it's good to keep an open mind and to be willing to experience other things. Let's see, Jessica.
Sure. So I'm going to keep it really, I think, practical. So I'm trying to remember what it was like when I was in your position as students. So, and looking out into this vast world, thinking it's so easy for them to say all this stuff. They've already made it, right? I wonder if any of you are having that thought right now. So something I want to tell you is you might not take a direct route into international development. You may need to take whatever job you can get out of the gate and do that. If that's what you need, then you do that. And you work there for a couple of years and you gain some experience. And then you try to transition a little bit closer to what you want to do. And then you try to transition even a little bit closer to what you want to do. And as you gain experience, as you gain knowledge, you will start to gain more value and like appeal to positions in international development. And you might even start to see areas where within your own company or organization, you can facilitate organizational development. So that's one thing I wanted to say, like the route you take might not always be direct, but always remember, and you may start to feel a bit disenchanted maybe as you go along, thinking there isn't space for me and my ideals in this world. I always get emotional when I talk about this, but there is, right? There is. It's the power of one. Okay, we all have the ability to make an impact in our organizations, every single one of us. And you have to stand by that, stand by what you believe in, and keep working towards it, even if it's the long run, because you know you're looking at your face in the mirror every day when you go home, right? And you know that the hard way is the right way. Sometimes the easy way is not always the right way. But give yourself time, give yourself some grace, and allow and accept that you might need to take a winding route to where you want to go, but don't forget where you want to go. That's what I want to say. So don't forget that, and don't make too many sacrifices for what you believe in, because it does start to do something to you, right? It does start to do something inside you.
Thank you so much. We'll move to Anne if you want to close with your remarks.
Sure, thank you. Topically, I see climate change, specifically adaptation strategies for how to mitigate and navigate the impacts of climate change, especially in fragile countries, becoming one of the biggest development priorities over the next 4 years. You can already see that happening with the current Biden administration. So if you can think about how your education and experience relates, that might serve you well as you figure out how to promote yourself with development organizations. And then echoing Dhinesh, networking, maintaining connections, getting to know the players and the issues is also really helpful. I would highly recommend setting up informational interviews with organizations you find interesting, sitting in on webinars, just things that you can do to help you become more conversant in like development speak and comfortable talking about yourself and how your education and experience relates to development. So, I mean, to that point, like, don't hesitate to reach out. I don't know everyone on this panel, but I'm fairly confident that they would all, myself included, welcome a follow-up email or phone call or a connection on LinkedIn. So take advantage of having met us today and like, don't let that opportunity slip.
Thank you so much. And Pallavi, if you want to close out the panel with your advice.
Sure, thank you. So in addition to what was mentioned by other panelists, I think there are some small things that you can probably do where you are at. So one thing I would say is, start practicing collaboration, whether it's in, project work that you're doing with your classmates, or you're out and about. Just try and become the team person. I think that will take you a long way in any role. The other thing is, like, I think there is a big tendency of being in echo chambers in our social and friend circle. So I'd encourage you to take a look at your friend circle and expand it if you can, to incorporate people from different thought processes, cultures, language, and other areas. I think it'll help you in the more accustomed you get in relating to people and in being comfortable with people who don't look like you or talk like you, the better it is for this kind of work in future. It also, I think, it's being sort of a person who usually is in the room who doesn't look like a lot of people. I will say this: folks appreciate when everyone else has the patience to understand that not everybody speaks a certain way, not everybody looks a certain way. I, for one, take 2 more minutes to make a point than a native English speaker would. So these smaller nuances, if you can pick and practice, that would be wonderful. The third thing, which really worked for me, was volunteering. I have been volunteering from a very early age. It helped me see people beyond the challenges they are in, beyond the socioeconomic issue that they are facing. It helped see people as people, and that helps you in creating that kind of power balance, that kind of equal partnership relationship wherever you are. So just those couple of points. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists today for joining us. As Dr. Ives said earlier, I mean, you've all gotten there. You've gotten to that point in international development, and a lot of us haven't. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences and your knowledge with us. And we're really grateful for you joining us today. With that, I will pass it over to Rhonda to conclude us.
Just one quick moment. I just posted on the chat requesting everybody to please go to menti.com and enter the code provided in the chat. You should see a screen that allows you to answer this one question that says, what is your one key takeaway from this session? So do submit your answers there. We'll have a little graphic that we'll be sharing with all of y'all after the event. Thank you. Please go ahead, Rhonda.
Okay, I do not want this conversation to end because this has been absolutely fantastic. I did not expect to hear so much talk about the human connection. And to me, that is very touching and meaningful. I personally got so much out of this panel, and I'm sure everybody else did too. Thank you to all of our panelists. This was a great opening to the expo. Thank you, Rachel and Romika. Really appreciate your hard work on this. Everybody, join us tomorrow at noon, where we will have the career panel and the poster awards. So everybody have a really great day. Thank you.